Sounds good to me. Yeah. So let's see.
So here's the tweet. Wait, you guys can't see my screen still.
Can we?
Yeah. Can you?
Yeah, we can see it.
Can you
Okay.
see yours? Okay.
I see the tweet, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, first of all, hello and welcome to Monday. What is today? The 15th, May 15th, the 20th Solid Ground live stream. And we are delighted to see everybody. Solid Ground is usually we host this live stream every Monday. For anybody who's new, we do this every Monday at 10 Pacific time, which is what, 1 Eastern? No, noon Eastern.
It's
One
Eastern.
1 Eastern, yeah.
Okay. What time is it for you, David?
6 p.m. GMT.
Jenny, is it the same for you?
Yes, I'm also
Okay.
in the UK.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And David, you want to start us off with the Solid Ground blurb?
Yes, thanks.
Blurb.
Solid Ground blurb. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice, CSJ, aka woke, and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 per month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such. Thank you very much.
So today we're joined by Jenny Holland. We're so happy to have you, Jenny. I really enjoy your Substack. I really, really enjoy your writing so much. You're like right on the money. So, I mean, every time I read your stuff, I'm like, yes. So
much appreciated.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. And Jody wanted to talk about something that you posted recently. So I'll just let Jody take that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Jenny's Substacks are always very thought-provoking. There's a lot of analysis, which, of course, we don't get a lot on mainstream media, which I appreciate. And this particular Substack is called A Very Important Tweet That You All Must Read, which links together trans ideology, queer theory, critical race theory, and finally, critical theory itself. Even Billy Bragg approves. And so I'm going to share the tweet that Billy Bragg retweeted, which I assume, Jenny, is how you saw it. Okay, so, and it was retweeted by Emma Harriet Nicholson, and the original tweet is from Fletcher S. Audi or Odd. And Odd. I'm going to share it now so we can read it. So the original tweet is, if trans falls, and I assume what Fletcher means is if the trans ideology or gender ideology falls, that means queer theory falls. If queer theory falls, then critical race theory falls. And if critical race theory falls, then all of critical theory falls. They're all set up in a row. All it takes is the force of about 65+% of a population finally fed up enough. So Jenny, I'm just wondering if you can walk us through what that tweet means, because you seem to agree.
Yes.
And
I think the first really interesting thing about that tweet is that Billy Bragg retweeted the retweet of it, and he commented on it that this is why he will always stand by trans ideology no matter what. And that really was one of those moments that really stopped me in my tracks, because, you know, everyone who's sort of critical of woke ideology writ large, we always have this sense that we understand what's going on, but it's so confounding and confusing and demoralizing sort of on a daily basis that when you stumble across something that you find particularly succinct or illuminating, you really, it's like a breath of fresh air or a glass of water for someone in the desert. And Billy Bragg retweeting this as evidence as to why he will remain an ideologue in this category was one of those breath of fresh air moments, because it explains why this otherwise really kind of far out of left field ideology has so many there's so many fierce adherents to it, because it's not really about the specific trans people who are living this experience and their rights or lack thereof. It's not really about that ultimately. For a large number of informed people, ideologically informed people, they can't let it fail, because to let the one lie fail, it means all the other lies will go in a domino. And that
Oh
can't
wait,
happen.
Jenny, just to be clear, Billy Bragg agrees with this because he wants trans idea.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
would you
why
give a
Yes.
little context for who he is? I don't know
Yeah,
who he
sure.
is or
So
what his,
Billy
yeah.
Billy Bragg was a really famous UK, and David, you can chime in here. You might even know more than me. He's a famous UK English singer-songwriter, and he was really big in the '80s. And he was a big sort of lefty trade union guy. And I was sort of a fan of his up until this all happened. The biggest thing he did in America was he did a collection of Woody Guthrie songs with Wilco in the late '90s, early 2000s, Mermaid Avenue. So he's always had this sort of like man of the people vibe. And, he's not hugely famous, but he's very, very well known in left wing and kind of artsy, liberal, intellectual circles in the UK and also, I think, in the States. So the actual quote, that his quote tweet, to me, it wasn't clear to me, was he supportive of the original tweet, as in, yes, exactly, that's why we support the trans ideology, or if he was using it as a sign of like, okay, or if he was requoting it negatively and saying this is what we risk losing if we don't support trans ideology. Either way, it doesn't really matter what his intent was. Either way, the underlying message was very clear, and it was clear to Billy Bragg and to me. I just wasn't sure, did he say that was a good thing or a bad thing as pertains to the tweet? But yeah, I think the thing that all those things have in common is that they fundamentally ask us to turn off our innate sense of fairness and unlearn all of our common sense and reject the evidence of our eyes and ears. And we have to destroy that so that we can accept this ideology. And that's why they're all linked. And that's why the trans one to me is like the marquee of the marquee ideology, because it's the most radical in the sense that it's asking us to accept the destruction of our physical and emotional identity, i.e., whether we're male or female. I don't really want to use the word gender identity, but our sexed identity, whether we're male or female.
And so if that can be accomplished, if we can destabilize or get people to not believe that that's real, that there is such a thing as male or female, then that now we've broken them down enough so that they can accept all of these other ideologies.
Exactly. And I think I said in my Substack as well, I think that the trans ideology is the most dangerous, I think, because everyone is either male or female. So everyone on this planet has a sexed identity, and it's a foundational. It's our core and our foundation of our sense of ourself. Like one of the first things we learn when we're babies is the difference between a male and a female, a boy and a girl, a man and a woman, a mom and a dad. And if we can erode that, and if we can destroy that, and if we can destabilize that, then that's a win for the ideologues and a loss for those of us who still believe in humankind.
And reality.
And reality. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I remember thinking that like of male and female, like that's the original other. And you always have that other, no matter what tribe, what culture, what society you belong to. You could live in a completely homogenous, very insular society where everyone's the same color, everyone's the same religion, everyone is the same economy, everything, but you still have that other. And if we could, so exploiting that, you mentioned something about globalism. Like if we can exploit that in people, then you basically have the whole world. If you're able to successfully do that. And I love the term you used, prosperity guilt.
Yeah.
Jenny's great at her coining terms. Countries that suffer from prosperity guilt, like Western nations, Western Europe, United States, Canada, we are easily, the CRT stuff is easy to get in, the racial stuff, but like it's a lot harder in countries that, maybe are more homogenous and actually have real problems, like don't have
Yeah.
running water, or can't
Yeah.
grow food, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like that they still have a male and female stuff, like other.
Well, it's the
Yeah, I
original
mean,
other, like you say, and it's also if you think in terms of like perceptual heuristics and the way that our brains categorize things, it's the fundamental way that we
Binary.
perceive reality. It's the very first one we perceive is that when we see another person, we can't help it. It's automatic. We observe are they male or female? And then we start to
Right.
put them into different categories. And it's just this almost subconscious, well, it is kind of a subconscious process for us.
Yeah.
And so if you can undermine that and make people question that original heuristic, that original perception, then
yeah.
what can you not
If you,
make people
if you
question?
if you can violate that boundary of what is a mother and what is a father, then you can violate every other boundary going forward. There's no, I think that's such a psychic violation to try and convince us, to try and hoodwink little kids that not all women, or not all mothers are women. And these linguistic tricks, these bad faith sophist arguments, like those are not just sort of politically threatening or morally threatening. I think they're deep emotional and psychic transgressions in a way that we need to take a lot more seriously. They're a foundational threat to me. Like if you can't call a woman a mother, or if you can't call a mother a woman, then you're really talking about, an existential erasure that's bad for the adult woman in question, obviously, and all women in question, whether they're mothers or not. But it's just think of it from a child's perspective, and how frightening and how alienating and how destabilizing that would be if you're living in a school, in a world of school and society at large, telling you that that what you need, like the connection that you need, and the bond that you automatically feel, is actually not exactly what you think it is, which is a mother to a child. It's something more complicated and more inscrutable, and you're being made to, you're sensing this pressure to accept that, when you really fundamentally are like, wait, I'm a baby, but I still know that this is my goddamn mother, not birthing person.
Like interchangeable birthing person. It almost makes
Yeah.
people like interchangeable, and it makes me wonder what else that does, besides just like, obviously you can branch out and apply that to race and other categories of other, I mean, even night and day, right? That's in the Bible,
Yeah.
right? God created
Yeah.
night and day. I mean, the conscious and the unconscious. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we think that are set up in binaries. And if we can cause some ambivalence there, like just how, I don't think we can even comprehend how destabilizing that might be to a person's psyche.
Right.
Well, is the object to be destabilizing, or is it an attack on human reproduction? What is it? Is it both?
It's both, I would say.
Mhm.
I mean, James Lindsay, I think that quote that I was so impressed by, I think it was sort of like taken out of James Lindsay's playbook. I mean, he talks a lot about this, and extremely well, and much better than I could ever do, because he's actually slogged through all these texts these big, long, heavy books that I find completely unreadable and undigestible, and he's done that work. But it is both, and I don't know how to separate them, actually, because I think, the way family formation and the way we partner and the way we reproduce is very tied to stability. So, doing it willy-nilly and just saying, oh, we can just hatch in pods and blah, blah, blah. Like that's actually that's like a psychic rupture that, if you're being flippant about it, then you're either very, very unwise and you're very naive, or you're very malevolent. I don't, and who knows what, I don't know how the forces that array against us, how they divvy up between malevolent and naive. I genuinely don't know. That's a question I ask myself a lot.
Yeah, that pod reproduction, that's really interesting. I just got, and I've been corresponding with a parent who sent me some K through 1 sex education materials from their child's school that include a song about how reproduction is about a sperm, an egg, and a uterus, and it doesn't matter in what combination those came to be. And it's this song for kindergartners about sperms, eggs, and uteruses. And it's like it divorces anything human or spiritual or sacred from the act of reproduction, and it's just about body parts.
How long have K through first grade been given biological and reproductive education?
I know. I'm going to talk to this parent
Yeah.
in hopefully in the next couple of weeks and because this person is much more familiar with this curriculum and can walk me through how messed up it is. But just from what I've seen a little bit of, it's really strange. It's really inappropriate on so many levels. What does that mean anymore? Inappropriate, but yeah, Jennifer, sorry.
It just amazes me how people are willing to sacrifice children to get to whatever bizarre point they're trying to get to. And I'm not sure if they have a very clear vision for how they want the world to be. But it seems to me that, to queer things means to totally break down boundaries and break down any sense of there's one unifying reality. But the fact that they can sacrifice kids' well-being and potentially damage them for life just strikes me as the absolute height of evil.
Yeah, it is. It's very dark and disconcerting when you realize it, isn't it? It's very it's astounding, and it never stops shocking me. It never stops shocking me. And I think I actually said that in that Substack. No matter how many times, I mean, I spend a lot of time online, and I see a lot of these libs of TikTok reels or videos, and a lot of this content comes through my eyeballs, and it still shocks me. And that's because that's really what it boils down to, is that people. This is my opinion, and people, adults, would rather denial is the most powerful force that exists in human nature. Your ability to deny reality and to delude yourself, and more important than the love of your child is the acceptance of the in-group. Like everything is the most important thing is the acceptance of the in-group and gaining the validation of your peers. And it turns out a lot of people are willing to override their own common sense and sacrifice their children's well-being to maintain their status in an in-group. That's what it seems to me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I can't help but think you're probably right there. I mean, I was thinking as you guys were talking about like this, the way that people have almost a pathological obsession with equity, that it means that we need to flatten all categories. It made me think of like, all these conversations we have about ChatGPT and what happens if you ask an AI to like, I don't know, like create as many paper clips as they possibly can, and the AI will just basically tear the whole system down, the whole of the earth down to make as many paper clips as possible. This feels like a malfunction of the brain of just kind of going forward relentlessly towards equity, flattening everything as you can, because everyone just thinks that's the best thing to do. But I think you're right. It's got to be around the fact that I'm looking after the child, but for these people, it's like, but I want to be doing so in a way that's I'm being reinforced by my group that I'm doing it in the right way, and that overrides any sort of what you think is an instinct for looking after and protecting your child.
Well, this is not a new thing, right? We've seen this, children being sacrificed in many ways. Jenny, we're just talking about Ireland and Northern Ireland, the Catholic Church. We won't get into that, but it like, if the point about is it malevolence or is it naivete, right? It seems like I'm thinking about this need to be in the in-group and the whole, I'm sorry, liberals, like a lot of liberal people I see in my area wanting to fit and declaring their children as trans when the child is like 4 or 5 years old, and starting them on that path, and then posting it on Facebook like it's like as an advertisement for look how good I am and look how liberal I am, and how, so that feels like naivete to me. And it feels like if there is malevolence, right, if there's a cabal or some central authority pushing this from on high, that they very well know that that's what human beings do, and that's what's being exploited. So it seems like both forces are in play, right? This malevolence. Yeah. The question is for what, right? So then we come into reproduction. Like, is it? Then this is why I get I need a T-shirt that says conspiracy theorist. Like, this is the question. Like, are we? Because it seems like to me there's other forces too. There's all kinds of things that are pushing on us to not reproduce, or in my case, what I think about sex a lot, to not have sex, like making it more difficult for us to connect sexually with each other. And this breaking down of I mean, if you have surgery to remove your genitals and cannot orgasm and cannot reproduce, like it just feels like, and you're messing with your hormones, like I don't know, I haven't talked to a lot of trans people and what their sex life is like, but I have heard a lot of trans people say they do not have orgasms. So I mean, what is the how is the, for males the orgasm is necessary, right, to reproduce, like, and you need to have the actual equipment. So it feels like people are reproducing less. We know that, we have statistics. People are having, at least in Western nations, less children. Millennials, I read somewhere, they're having a lot less sex, according to these surveys, than Gen X is. So is that the goal? Like to get us to not reproduce or to get us to not connect with each other? It does feel like we have this scalpel coming in and cutting out the very parts of us that make us most human and most our ability to connect.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I wish I knew what the goal was. I mean,
Agenda
I
is?
think, I think there, yeah, what the agenda is. I think there are definitely people who have a lot of power and a lot of influence who think the world is overpopulated. So, I know I'm very familiar with the conspiracy theory of depopulation and whatnot. And this would certainly suit that agenda. But I also think that, because going back to the tweet anyway, it originates in critical theory. And I have to admit, I actually had to Google what critical theory was because I studied it in university, but that was 25 years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, now I remember. And critical theory is basically like the subversion of everything. I mean, that's the most sort of simple way of putting it. It's like the Frankfurt School, neo-Marxist. James, again, I refer everyone back to James Lindsay because he does a much better job with this than I ever will. But it's break everything old. That's my take on it. Break everything old, destroy the past, destroy our connection with the past, and we're going to make up a whole new set of rules. And I don't like that idea at all. In fact, I'm very hostile to it. I think I've always been pretty hostile to it. I've always been suspicious of it. This falls in with that as well. And considering how much of trans ideology is embraced by academia, and it's sort of buttressed by a lot of faux intelligentsia, faux intellectual guff. Like it doesn't merit the name, it doesn't merit the name intellectual work, but there's a lot of it out there, and there's sort of almost like I would say a cottage industry, but it's not small. It's a big production unit churning out content and papers and justifications for the trans ideology is coming out of academia. So there's this sort of like humanity loathing, resentment filled, bitter body of work that's been in the universities since the 60s, if not a little earlier. And this is just one of its rotting flowers. Like this is just one of many. And it's very much like CRT in that regard. It's based on this sort of resentment of natural femininity and a resentment of traditional masculinity. And it's just based on resentment.
You think it's
and
also
the lie that you can change. But yeah.
Yeah, that you can. You think it's also a resentment of nature. I'm just thinking about Marxism, right? Like the workers own the means of production. It's like, well, it feels like we've been disenfranchised, is the word, from our own means of production for quite like this heavy regulation of farming, or like home. I see, like especially home farming, like you can't have more than 6 chickens and you can't do this, and like this, like, and then birthing must happen in a hospital and medicalizing it, and then death, like taking away these and processes that human beings have been doing since humanity existed, right? Since we stood up, like we've been doing this stuff forever. We know we die, we're born, we reproduce, and now it feels like this is the ultimate, like taking away, if we can remove and make it just an egg and a sperm in some artificial womb now, and literally regulate reproduction. Like this is not something you're allowed to do at home on your own, folks. Like the bureaucracy needs to be involved in this, the most intimate realm, right? So if we can destroy the need for intimacy or the drive for intimacy, that we can easily like say, okay, you guys can't reproduce on your own. Like, we have licensed professionals that know how to do that. You come and you get your all your equipment removed and put into a laboratory, and we will do it. You can order your child on Amazon. Like, I know that sounds extreme, but it feels like this is a trend that's been going on for a long time. And now this is like the ultimate, if we can remove the ability to create your own family.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's so interesting how this is like, there's this, well, there's been this drive to make sex recreational for a long time now. We know the birth control pill and the sexual revolution and this whole hookup culture we've got now, which makes it very recreational and shames people for even catching feelings, right? Having feelings about the person that they're sexually engaged with, or the people that they're sexually engaged with, because we're supposed to be free with this now. We're supposed to be not hung up on commitment. That's shameful to think about commitment. These trends in the zeitgeist that have just carried forward. And then with it going online, and we've got this OnlyFans thing, we've got this cam girls and pornography. It's become not only recreational, but also transactional, and also something that's done more and more remotely and voyeuristically. So the sexual impulse is being channeled into something that's completely divorced from true intimacy with another person. And you can have intellectual connections, you can have emotional connections, but without that connection, how deeply are you ever bonded to another human being that you spend your life with? It's just a completely different level of quality of relationship. And so to me, I don't know about there's lots of conjecture about the agenda, or why, or who, or who's funding, and for what purpose, or is this coming up organically, or is it being pumped in? And we can talk about that, because I think there's a lot to talk about there. But at the end of the day, to just call it what it is, it looks like a death cult to me. I mean, the whole thing just looks like a death cult. It's anti-human, and it's anti-human in so many different ways.
It's a lot of breakdown of the family too. And that's what totalitarian thinkers have always tried to do, is to decimate the family. And when you were mentioning earlier, Jenny, about destroying and smash anything that's old, that's what Maoism wanted to do. And you always want to break apart the family, because that's where people's heart really lies, and where their true loyalties are, and where people are willing to sacrifice and do just about anything for their kids and their spouse. And they don't want that to be the center of our focus. They want us to, I think, be good comrades, and I think that type of messaging was pumped in a really manipulative way about the COVID vaccines, kind of like you're only being a good citizen if you get this vaccine. Like, forget your individual health and your individual very reasonable concerns about this vaccine that was rushed through production. You have to do this, or else you're killing all these people. And I just think we're being geared more and more towards thinking collectively. Eat bugs, because, we don't want you having meat because you're just participating in ruining the environment. All of this. And, maybe you would like maybe you would like the idea of social credit. Maybe you would like a credit card that tracks your carbon footprint for you.
Yeah. If you think about it, so Leslie, what you were just saying about how we've been reconditioned to think of sex as recreational, this has been going on for now we're like the second generation out of 4, right? That's been taught to think this way and live our lives accordingly. That's very, like, that was what softened up the ground for this kind of the precipice of this dystopia we're on, because fundamentally, and also, and feminism as well, which constantly portrayed motherhood as a burden and a source of oppression. Because fundamentally, name one thing in the world that one individual can do that is more powerful than give birth to another human being and raise that human being. What's more powerful than that? I interviewed a young woman last week, a detransitioner, and she said women are eternal because of their procreative ability. Is literally the most important thing in the world. Is the most important thing in the world. I don't care about nuclear weapons. I don't care about geopolitics. The woman's reproductive capability is the most powerful thing in the world. And then add on to that her sexual allure, and her beauty, you know, whatever you determine beauty to be, her way, you know, the emotional feelings that it brings out in men and people around her. If you think about it through this lens, the woman is the most important creature on this earth. All of us, young, young women, middle-aged, and old women. We're the most important creatures in the world. But what we've been taught from the left is our bodies are our source of oppression. Our bodies are a location of oppression. If we can just get out there into the world and play on the level playing field with a man, then we won't be oppressed. And then from the right, it's like, stay home and hide your body, because your body is going to be your body is going to cause you to be attacked by beasts out there, right? But actually, what neither have been completely honest. It was certainly not the left, and the right, obviously going back quite a ways, was pretty terrible. And in recent years has just been kind of trying to sort of maintain this sort of sensible center. But no one has really told the truth, and that is there's something supreme about a woman, and women ourselves have failed to recognize that and failed to say it strongly enough. And I think, at least as far as mainstream culture goes, and mainstream media and film and music, it's always the sense of like, oh my God, being a woman is such a drag. It's such a pain in the ass. And if only I could, just go and be a CEO or something, as if being a CEO is more powerful than being a mother. It's not. It's just not. I'm just going to categorically reject that. It's not. Even if you can fire people and hire people, even if you can lead countries, it's still not more important, because the only people who remember you at the end of your life are your immediate family. No one else remembers you. Your legacy is never going to be even if you're famous, your legacy it's not going to last more than the lifetime of the generation below you.
It's a really interesting framework. I really, there's so much there. There's a lot there, Jenny. I think the idea that women have been taught to turn against their own reproductive capacity and look at it as a burden, and see themselves as being liberated from it in some way that makes them a real person in the world.
Right.
Exactly. It's really interesting. And then on the other hand, we have this sort of embattled polarization between masculinity and femininity. And
yes,
and because they're both being lived out on this really superficial plane. And so you have the attack on like feminine reproduction and feminine value and role from the left, from the progressives. And then you've got this backlash against feminism from men who've been disenfranchised and told that they're toxic because they, where do they fit into this? And so, and I have this, I'm still confused about what I think about feminism, period. I'm like, there's waves, there's different aspects, there's things that were good, there's things that sound really militant and strange. I'm not like versed in feminist theory. But I do see this growing backlash against it that seems anti-woman from the right as well. Am I making any sense here?
That the Madonna whore thing, kind of on a cultural level?
Maybe.
Like the right, like women need to preserve themselves and stay locked on their chastity belt, and then on the right, it's like, oh, go like
right.
Cardi B on the left.
Right. I like Cardi B, but
all brought to us by the way, which my friend Amelia pointed out, by the way, all brought to us by courtesy of Big Pharma in the form of the pill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And Cardi B in the form of plastic surgery. Although I claim that Cardi B is this generation's Lucille Ball. She's a comedian. She's brilliant, funny. She's a funny girl. Anyway.
Okay. That's interesting. I do think her personality seems nice, but some of the videos are like, whoa, sorry.
They're awful. They're awful, but her personality, I find it very charming. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, where conservatives lose me. I mean, I've basically become much more conservative, but I think most people do anyway as they age and they become middle-aged. And where they lose me is that they give me the impression that they think that 150 years ago, women were at home and it was wonderful and glorious and everyone was happy and it was so much better for women and it was so much better for children, it was so much better for everyone. And I think that's simplistic. I think it's also not true. I think women have always worked to some degree or another, unless they were, very high middle class and aristocratic. So it's hugely class dependent. And, women having independence and financial independence is just, I don't understand how that would ever be a bad thing. But I think the real toxicity has come from the left. Feminism, and again, I'm not that versed in the different scholarly, modes, but I think that the one thing I will say about feminism that is positive is that it's the TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, who I think were the first to recognize the danger of the trans ideology, specifically toward women. And they've been fighting that, and they've been suffering. They've been punished, socially exiled and threatened, and really like treated terribly for their radical feminist views. And other than that, I don't have anything good to say about feminism. Like, nothing at all.
Well, what about women being able to vote? I mean, second wave feminism, right? I'm no feminist scholar, but
Yeah.
it seems like
Yes,
feminism,
I think that's first wave.
or is that first wave?
Yeah.
Okay, so like the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to keep your children if you
Yes.
divorce,
Yes.
like all those
Yes.
things. It feels like CRT. It's a similar. It's like this feminism or internet feminism, people call it. Like,
Yeah.
is kind of all the concepts are. It's like feminism arose out of very real material needs and wants, which were one, right? Like we got the vote, we got property, the ability to be financially independent. And the same thing with this notion of the CRT stuff is based on like, actual racism, like redlining and Jim Crow laws, like that Black people fought for and won. These are very material things. They're both based on very material things, and now they've morphed into these very vague. It's like we're still exploiting that old stuff that doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think it morphed.
Anymore.
I think they were hijacked. I don't think it was morphed. I think it was hijacked because it wasn't an organic. I maintain, and there's plenty of other people who speak about this and study it closely. It's not an organic movement either. The CRT is not organic. Trans is not organic. It's the coming together of the malevolent and the naive, like you said before, Jody. It's like there's a lot of people who were brought up to kind of idealize and deify the civil rights struggles and the bra burning and the Woodstock generation and all the anti-Vietnam War protests. And we looked up to that as like, oh, wasn't that brave and great? And wouldn't it have been cool to be alive in that time? And, Gen X is that sort of like dip. It was like a hiatus between the baby boomers and the millennials, where we were sort of like, oh, that sounded like the 68 student revolutions and everything. They sounded pretty cool. I bet that would have been exciting to live through. And as time went on, it was like, oh, there's no more causes left. So people became essentially more desperate to cosplay them.
Well, it's gratuitous activism.
It's gratuitous activism and it's cosplay. And
Mm-hmm.
that mixed with this, I don't know what you want to call it, neo-Marxist globalism that needs a vehicle for control.
Mm-hmm.
And the two have met.
Oh, that's a really brilliant observation. That's really interesting. I remember just being so stunned by the fact that in graduate school, we were taught to be activists, but we weren't really taught what we were supposed to be activists about. But, you're a counselor, but your first job is to be an activist. And then it's an activist for social justice. But what does that mean? Because there's so many different things that could mean. So you're just being primed to be the delivery vehicle for the next thing that's being pushed.
Yeah, you're shock troops. You're shock troops.
Yeah,
you're neo-Maoist shock troops. I mean, I heard this crazy thing today. Riley Gaines, the swimmer who swam against William Thomas, and she did an interview with Jordan Peterson, and she said that Leah Thomas's teammates at the University of Pennsylvania, when they became upset, I suppose, at having to strip in front of him, and he was stripping in front of them, and they were in the locker rooms, They were forced to get naked with him.
Good grief.
They
Sorry.
were mandated to go to the counseling service at the university to discuss their bigotry and transphobia.
I remember reading about that. They had a psychology team there that was linked to it, and they said you have to go speak to them. Do not go out and speak to anyone else about your bigoted views, because it will not end well for you. It was a threat, wasn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I've never.
Oh my God, that's so psychologically abusive.
It's so psychologically abusive. It's rape with words.
Yeah.
It's sexual assault with words.
Well,
And
it's
these
you're
are the
being
same
molested.
people-
Now let's get you comfortable with your molester. Let's get you comfortable.
That's the same thing with all this race stuff too, though.
Yeah.
It
Like,
is.
let's get you comfortable with
Right,
being
that's what
called a
Jody went
bigot,
through.
with being told, exactly. That's what I went through at work, with being told that you're a white supremacist. And if you have any objection whatsoever, that is further evidence of how utterly terrible you are. I mean,
Yeah.
it is so mentally abusive. It's a total Kafka trap. And it's like, somebody described all of this stuff, the critical social justice stuff, and it being pushed as sort of a form of mind rape. And I fully agree. I think it's incredibly abusive and sick.
So now imagine that. I mean, we're adults, right? When I went through at Smith, I was in my late 40s, right? So, I mean, and even we've already got one tier of like the social pressure. Like, you've got the social pressure. And if you bust through that and you're like, no, I'm not going to participate. Now it's like, okay, now you need to go to see a counselor. Or now we're going to get into individually and make you comply, right? Imagine that pressure on a kindergartner. Somebody who's literally their brain, all of their psyche is just forming.
Well, and that goes back to what Jenny was saying earlier when we started this conversation about how this is one of your foundational understandings, this paradigm of sex. So male, female. And when somebody tries to interrupt that, it feels really wrong. And it's very destabilizing. But if you get people young enough, can you interrupt that so early that you've taught them just not to develop that sort of intuition and develop that foundation?
Do you think you can, Leslie?
I mean, it seems like it does seem like there are some differences. One of my observations when I was going through graduate school was that the people who were younger than me, because I went back to school at around 40, and a lot of the people I was in school with were in their 20s. They seem to absorb this stuff so much more easily because they've been groomed into it. And so I don't know if you can really disrupt. I don't know what it feels like on the inside to them, where their cognitive dissonance lies, if it lies anywhere. But I do know that it looks like the uptake is easier.
It makes sense, right? If you look at child development and how the brain forms and like acquisition of language, that there are certain time periods where you're a lot more malleable.
And learned helplessness too. The studies on learned helplessness, and that you tell somebody something over and over, you do something to someone over and over, they're not going to develop the ability to push back against it. That will be stunted.
That's why it really is a form of grooming. You're grooming children to have, no boundaries, not to have even very basic boundaries where they don't know what a male is or a female is, to not have sexual boundaries, to not have boundaries around truth and reality. All this postmodern thought that there's no truth, there's no reality. Well, if you're teaching people that, then you can insert ideas into their heads. Their heads are very confused.
And vaccinations, you can assert things into their body. Like, the body is literally the boundary between us and, like, my body is me, and then everything else is not me. And
right.
My body is part of this collective.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want. You can farm it. You can inject things into it for the sake of the collective.
The violation, it really is quite parallel, isn't it? I mean, we've got a violation of the mind. You're not allowed to have your own thoughts. We've got a violation of the body going on at the same time, where you're not entitled to your own physical autonomy.
No. I think, though, the question of, can people overcome it if they've been brought up in this world? And I think certainly some can. And I think that we're now seeing people come of age who were brought up in a sort of trans CRT, up is down, down is up world. And there's, two notable questioners, I would say. One is Jazz Jennings, famously, is obviously starting to question the horrible ththings that were done to him by his mother, and say things like, I just don't feel like myself. I just want to feel like myself. I mean, he's not a boy, he's a young man. He's obviously in such a dark place. He has to, I think for his own sake, he needs to maintain the connection to a female identity. Otherwise, the horror will be too much. But in a much less well-known example, like this woman I spoke to last week is a detransitioner who snapped out of it. It was like a sort of a process of things falling away as she got a little bit older, not before she sterilized herself, which she said she did out of white guilt. She said she was happy to sterilize herself because she said, and it's in my Substack this week, if I strongly suggest you listen to it. She said, I went into surgery thinking, wow, one less white devil.
Oh my
I'm
God.
ending my line of white devil.
Oh,
and
heavens.
Yes, it's that bad. It's that bad. And, she's gone she's fully out of it now. And she's openly trans critical, whatever you want to call it. She's using her name, and, she's a very remarkable young woman, and she's quite brilliant. And she says truly astounding things. Her name is Lee Janet Marshall, and she's on my last week's Substack. But yeah, so I think what happens with a lot of people is they absorb whatever ideology or whatever morality they live with when they're young, and they can be very fervent in them, even especially in their teens, and then they hit their 20s and their 30s, and they start to be like, well, actually, they mature, and going back to the tweet, the reason the CRT is connected to the trans is connected to critical theory, and the reason they all have to be taken as a whole is because they all force us to override our common sense and our basic humanity, and that's actually very hard to do. So they can't allow any little deviations or any dissent, because that might prick someone's ears up and be like, wait, you're right, this doesn't feel right. So the overriding of the programming will work for a lot of people for a certain amount of time, but I don't think it can be done forever in perpetuity. I just don't think we are built that way. People mature, they get better with age, they get wiser with age, even if life has been terribly hard to them.
Yeah, there's an arc to life, and for people to be taught that it's okay to foreclose on future options for their ephemeral fancies of youth is quite malevolent.
I think it's borderline genocidal. It's certainly eugenicist.
Mm-hmm.
It's
we
certainly
lost David. It looks like we lost David. Bless you, Jennifer, too. And
thank you.
Maybe he'll pop back in. I don't know if he had some screen problem or something.
And also, as long as people have access, it's I think also why books are being edited and things are being like, we have access to if people have access to other ideas outside their current, what do you call it, contemporary setting.
Yeah,
they have access to Carl Jung, for example, or
yes.
if we still have access to these things where we can start to think for ourselves, and gosh, this ties into the psychedelics too, doesn't it, that we talked about?
Oh yes, actually it really does.
Access,
because I watched that.
You watched it? Yeah,
I watched it, and
access to the access to this, like the direct, your direct access to the source or the spirit, whatever that looks like, as opposed to going through other authorities. Like this is basically whoever they're trying to circumvent our own authority. And so as long as we have access to the means to do that, which, I mean, if you think about the Soviet Union, like the black market, like people always find a way.
Well, I think that's so important, Jody. I think it's so important, those things that still help us to cultivate our own unique thought. And I think there's so many ways that that's being suppressed. I think that expertism is a big part of that, referring to somebody else who's thought about things for you, and your thoughts are invalid unless they correspond to the appropriate authority, or unless they're intellectual enough, they're not valid. You can't explore. we're supposed to be ashamed of being ignorant instead of just being allowed to be curious. And we should be allowed to be curious. And David, what do you think about all this? You've been observing a lot today and haven't heard much.
He's looking very pensive and intelligent.
Yes, he is. I'm sure he has a lot of original thoughts.
No, I unfortunately dropped out just as you were saying, Jenny, about the link between why CRT and some of the other downstream ideologies fall when this happens. So I'm sorry I missed that. But I mean, I was thinking of Lenin, and the fact that Lenin used to say his favorite phrase was bourgeois privilege, and he would accuse anything of having bourgeois privilege that he wanted to control. It was just his way of getting power. So, he was accused very early on, I think, like of you shouldn't be killing people who are disagreeing with your way of doing things. And he'd say, well, freedom of speech is a bourgeois privilege, and I'll give them the freedom of speech once we've ended the Russian Revolution. And then we saw all these other things with Lenin, where I think he was quite keen on taking children away to communes, because to prioritize your own child or to have love for your own child was something like a bourgeois privilege. Again, that's not something that you should have sort of a privilege to be able to almost to have the privilege of having. It just sounds to me it's just a power tool, isn't it? And that bourgeois privilege thing is exactly what we're seeing here. Is everyone's being sort of made to feel guilty for wanting to have things, to want to have connection. Right. And equity should be our endpoint. And equity and fairness and the reduction of categories should be our endpoint. And it does. I mean, I'm sorry to bring up this point I made earlier, but it just feels like a kind of GPT algorithm that's just gone malfunctioned, and everyone's gone equity crazed. And they don't care how much stuff that they destroy along the way, because we have to all seem to be fitting in with the fairness mantras from the collective.
Yeah, it's that like equity Tourette's or whatever you want to think of it. But it's really interesting how we've shifted in such a short period of time. Like when my daughters were in school, what the concern was you'd always hear this phrase: you don't want to teach to the lowest common denominator. You want to help people to, you want education to bring out the best in each child or whatever. This is just the things that we would hear and people would talk about. And now we've gone complete 180 from that, where we definitely want to teach to the low. We don't say it that way. We talk about equity. We want to talk about bringing everybody down and equalizing and not giving anybody unfair advantages. And that means that's like this Harrison Bergeron thing, where we're going to cut off, anything that makes a person excel and handicap them. And then we're going to, tie that to all kinds of guilt and.
I was going to say, do you think if our society or our culture, we had better ways of dealing with equity, we would be in this mess? If we could sort of say, nah, look at all the bad things that could come from equity. Why equity isn't the vision that we want? If we could deal with that head on, would we have gotten into this mess? I don't know. I
think the problem is the we. I think that is the problem, because as you try to centralize and expand to cover the most broad population, you lose humanity. I mean, it's just like you can look at the success of a big school versus a small school and how it works with its kids, or you can work. I don't know. That's what I think we're trying to do. Too much management. It's too much human resources management, and that's what we've got this technocratic craze for administering to the people. And so it's this collective mindset is at odds with what it means to be an individual by nature.
Ian McGilchrist, have you guys been listening to any of Ian McGilchrist? He's like the neuroscientist who talks about the left brain, right brain, and he's brought this back. I know it was quite cod psychology to talk about left brain and right brain, but he really talks about how, I'm probably not going to do it justice here, how the different hemispheres do have different functions, but that we've basically become so left-brained, which is all about administration. He says the culture has just become, our universities are full of administrators administering everything. And he talks about, I think in the same way Camille Paglia talks about different epochs and empires that sort of got overwhelmed towards the end of their empires with administrators, because we had so much stuff. We had such a rich, diverse kind of society that for some reason, people started to kind of close off, and this needs to be managed, and we need to cut off the ends here, and we need to shape this into something, It almost went too far out, and now we just need admin.
It sounds like the makings of a great comedic novel or
Yeah.
sounds brilliant. But I just want to point out there's always somebody though making the decisions, right? There's like there's always like there's an elite that there's always somebody that this other stuff doesn't apply to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Like they're going to be allowed to have their own babies. They're going to be allowed to do the thing it is that the rest of us, you know, we need to have our legs chopped off, but they get to go to the dance.
The ones who get the steak while we have the bugs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like even like Andrew Doyle when he talks about the puritanical community for the what was it, the Salem witch trials, like the kids that were accusing people of being witches, as soon as the witch that was being accused was like one of like the high, you know, I don't know what you call it, one of the real top puritanical kind of like members of church's wife, he'd go, no, I think you're wrong. I think you might be wrong there. And then somehow everyone would just go, yeah, I think they were wrong there. But the poor wife over there, the wife of the poor man over there, we're gonna head for them instead.
For some reason, that makes me think of the show Cops. Or the show called Bad Boys, Bad Boys. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? And I remember watching that. I don't know what I was in my 20s or something. I was always like, how come they never raid a Beverly Hills mansion? You know, because there's some people doing cocaine in those mansions. You know, like why do they never? Like, I'm sure there's some illicit activity going on in those mansions. Like it's always like these like people have barely anything, like living in a trailer park and their car is broken down and they have no child care, and I don't know, just like
that is really interesting. That's such a good observation. Wow, what a great conversation, you guys. I feel like we could go for another hour, but we need to go because Jennifer's got her group.
So Jennifer, will you tell us sorry, not Jennifer, Jenny.
Yes.
Jenny, tell us the name of your Substack because it's really good.
Thank you. It's Saving Culture from Itself. The URL is just my name, which is Jenny E. Holland.
Well, I'll put a link under the video once I get after we do the live and I get it edited. So we'll put it up.
Jenny's very
Thank
engaged
you so much
for readers too. So if you engage,
come on over.
Yeah, Jenny, thank you for being here. It's so great to have you join us. I hope you do it again
happy
sometime.
You asked me. No, I'm delighted to be asked. So
awesome.
Yay.
Well, thank you all. Thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat.
Thanks,
too.
everyone.
And remember, solidgroundsupport.com.
Yeah, we hope to see y'all at groups.